All about Mingo, and I had a wonderful opportunity of coming into town every time, going by the new housing area out there. Some of the folks at the church put us in a van the other day, Connie and I, and took us around so we could see where everybody lives. So I think I've seen most of your houses. I got to do that in order to know where I'm going sometimes as I kind of start out and make those visits and be able to see all of you and get to meet you in your home surroundings. I did that, and I pulled in yesterday in the parking lot, and I thought to myself, man alive, you know what? I come to this town, oftentimes I don't see a lot of people out. I thought, I'm not sure where everybody is, but it's a Saturday afternoon. Maybe they're somewhere different. And as I pulled into the parking lot, all of a sudden I looked over here at the corner, and here was a lady walking with a little girl. And I thought, oh my goodness, I found the first real person out in the sunlight here in Mingo. I thought, I ought to say something to that person. But you know, when you're a stranger in town and all of a sudden you speak up, people might think you're a stalker or something and, trying to whatever. And I thought, oh, man. So I thought, I'm going to do what I do always. And that is, you always talk about a person's children. And that's an opportunity for you really to make a hit. Rather than a person, you can always talk to the child. So many times I've gone into people's homes who've been first-time visitors, and they're all expecting me to, lower the boom on them, and say, oh, we want you to come back and all this stuff. I love to go in there and sit down and look at their kid and say, oh, this is the cutest little kid I've ever seen. Let's play. Sometimes I get on the floor and I play with those kids, and the people are saying, they're going, I've never seen a pastor get on the floor like that. I thought he was going to pray, but no, he's down there playing with my son or my grandson, and there's something about recognizing in the power of that. As I drove in by all those new homes and all the places here in town, and I thought to myself, we're going to have a block party here next week. I wonder what's going to happen. And I remember that what I did was I pulled in the parking lot, and all of a sudden, as the lady was walking by, I thought, should I do? I said, I'm going to try this. So I said to her, I said, hey, I said, what a cute little girl you got there, You're having a great little walk out there. Now, are you walking the little girl, or is she walking you, And the lady goes, are you the new pastor? I thought, who gave that away? So I said, yes, I am. And then I thought, I'll stay a safe distance. You don't want to run up to someone. And the lady started walking towards me. I said, I'll take that as a good sign. I started walking towards her, and before you know it, two of us met out there. And I thought to myself, lady, I have no idea who you are. I have no idea where you've come from. All I know is I've been saying, God, help me with this process. And now you've sent me somebody, and I got to take a breath here, And all of a sudden we were out there, and I said, so what's this little girl's name? She was a cute little girl, had curls on top of her head, and she said to me, Ruby. I said, Ruby? I love it. She goes, that's an old-fashioned name. I said, I know. That's a beautiful name. What a great name, Ruby. Tell me all about her and what goes on. I didn't realize that she had other grandchildren, but it was great. I said, where do you live? She said, right over there. And I said, I'm not going to point at her, but she said, right over there. I said, well, that's great. That's wonderful. Boy, we had a long conversation. We talked about things. We talked about Haiti. And then she said to me, I've been to the mission field too. And we've talked about that. And all of a sudden we realized that even though we were standing there talking, having a great time, Ruby had continued her walk. And she said to me, I've got to run and catch up with her. I said, that's okay. Goodbye. We'll see you. And off she went. I thought to myself, it's surprising sometimes how God brings those kinds of people into your life. You have no idea who they are. But what I know is that God works with people in doing things in their life, planting seeds that I don't know anything about. All I have to do is sometimes go around and just open up a door. Do you hear what I'm saying? Sometimes all I have to do is speak a word, and it's the perfect word, and I have nothing to do with it. All I had to do was be willing to say something. She could have walked by this church, and I would see another one of those strange people, have no idea who it is. She's got her life, I've got mine. But I thought to myself, God, if this is really true, let me test that out a little bit. And I just spoke over to her, and I said, got a great little granddaughter there. And she goes, yeah, and we walked, and we talked together, and we had a great time. And then she told me that she'd been to Africa. I said, are you kidding me? That's great. I want to hear that story. We still have that story to complete, but I thought, man, what a great opportunity to do that. Now, I only say that to you because you've got an amazing thing coming up next week. It's called the block party. Now, when I came here, I couldn't believe you had anything like that. I thought, well, that's great. You've been doing that every year? No. I said, what do you mean you haven't done that every year? Well, you've got to. I said, well, we haven't done it every year. Well, I'm going to tell you what, I'm going to give you kudos for that, because there are a lot of churches that's exactly what they need to do and they've never done it. But here's another thing. Sometimes people have block parties, and you know what? They probably shouldn't have done a block party. What they do is celebrate their friendships, their relationship, their little cliques, and people come and people go, and people think, never want to be part of that. But there are other places where people come where, I guess maybe like I've talked about before, they share radical hospitality. They go up to people realizing that the person they're about to talk to, God's prepared that person. Do you hear what I just said? Just like I said, God, is there a good lady, a little girl, and me ought to say something to them. Oh, God, prepare this. And all of a sudden it was. And I thought to myself, man, my day's been richly filled by a new friendship, a new person that I've met. And then I came here today, and the person's sitting in the church. I thought to myself, are you serious? This is my sermon illustration. But what I also know is that there's one thing that God created us for, is to be hungry in our heart for relationships. Do you know what God's greatest desire is for us? To have a relationship with us. Do you hear what I just said? And you know what's the desire in everyone's heart? For us to have a relationship with some other person. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I understand that. But we are innately made in order to have a relationship, which reflects the very image of our God, who seeks to have a relationship with us. And in having that relationship, to do what it is that God asks us to do and to make that difference. One of the first churches I ever served was in Sioux City, Iowa. Now, do you know what Maid-Rite is? Do you? I grew up with Maid-Rites. You with me? So I go to this church. They're going to have this little party. I thought, that's great. And they said, yeah. They said, Pastor, we're so glad to have you here. This is your first church? I said, yes, it is. They said, well, it's great. We've already got our standard menu that we do. Well, what do you have your menu? He said, we got coleslaw, we got potato chips, we got drinks and everything else. We got taverns. I said, what? We got taverns. I must have heard that wrong. What in the world is a tavern? I said. Don't you know about taverns? Well, I think I do. But I've never heard of a Methodist church inviting people to a tavern. They said, no. I said, well, what is it? What is this thing? Well, you take hamburger, you grind up. I said, that's a Maid-Rite. They said, well, up here in Northern Iowa, we call it taverns. Because they serve it in taverns. I think to myself, whoo. I said to them, I'm from Southern Iowa. I don't know this type of thing. I said, it's a good thing you explained it to me, because I would have really felt bad. And the person said this to me, but what we serve are spiritual taverns. Did you hear what I just said? Now, I couldn't quite put that together. That's like radical hospitality. Spiritual taverns? What's a spiritual tavern? They said every time we give out a tavern, a hamburger, every time we give anything out, we're giving it as unto the Lord. And the person we receive it, we give it in the same love that Christ gave it to us, and the same gift that we make to somebody else. They're spiritual taverns. I said, well, don't you worry about whether it's good or not, or you've put too much meat on the... Nope. Said we just hand out whatever we make, and we just hand it to them, and we think, you know what? It's as up to the Lord. And all of a sudden, sometimes for some of those people, for some of them, they haven't had a tavern in a long time. They haven't had a good meal in a long time. But it really draws me to a new relationship with those people, to understand that I'm giving it as unto the Lord. Do you hear what I'm saying? It becomes more than a roasted ear. It becomes more than a bowl of ice cream. It becomes a sacrament, a gift that's given, a gift that is given. And the second church I served was in a place called Davenport, Iowa, and we had a program there that was called a Friends Sunday. You were supposed to invite your friends. And so we did a whole program leading up to this, and I said to everybody, what I want you to do is go out and invite somebody to come to church. You with me? You ever heard this from a pastor before? Don't you love that? I want you to go out and invite somebody to come to church. It's great if you're an extrovert. If you're an introvert, you're like, oh, don't do that kind of thing. And I used to say to him, I said, you need to just put it before the Lord. You need to just go to somebody and just say to them, no, you don't have to even invite them to church. Just go to somebody and just say, hey, here's a gift, whatever it is. And maybe what you want to say also is, I'd like to invite you to church. Drop it there. Just see what happens. 94% of the people who are out there searching, just waiting for somebody to give them an invitation. And the funny thing is, when you give an invitation, you don't expect anything back sometimes, and all of a sudden the gates open and the flood comes. Now, I'm telling you that because I've been there. I've been in a parking lot of this church on a Saturday, and the floodgate opened. I met a new friend. So at this church, I told everybody, I want you to go out and I want you to invite people to come into the church, everything else. Like inviting them to a block party, you know? And I thought, well, whatever. And I said, well, start with your friends that you know. That's what you need to do. So we did the whole thing, came back the next week, and they had to have a little slip of paper where the person they invited got to sign this, and we turn them in and say, look, here's who I invited to the church. So they did that whole thing. All of a sudden I looked, and there wasn't one paper back the next Sunday. I thought, I better preach that sermon again. They didn't hear me, so I preached the sermon again. And all of a sudden, the people, I said, so what I want you to do is go out there, and I want you to invite people, and then come back. We're going to put it on a board now in front of the church, so everybody gets to see all the people you've invited. Now go invite somebody. Came back the next week, wasn't one tag on that wall. I thought, we've got 1 week to go, 2 weeks to go. So I went home and I said to my wife, I said, I got a problem with this. She said, what's that? She goes, nobody came. I said, nobody invited anybody. This is a failing program. I don't know how I'm going to derail this thing, what I'm going to do. And I love my wife. You know what she said to me? She said, who have you invited? Well, I said, you don't understand. I'm the pastor of the church. What she didn't say was, but should have said, is that and 2 cents will get you nothing. Who'd you invite? I said, well, I'm here to run the program, run the church. I'm not out there to invite people. That's not my job. She says, oh, yes, it is. And that's probably why you don't have anybody's names up on that board, because you haven't done it yourself and let off to begin with. I thought it's not good to quote Scripture to a pastor, especially your husband. I said, well, who am I supposed to invite? I said, I went to go visit new people who visited the church. She said, that doesn't count. Well, what am I supposed to do? She said, you need to find somebody and you need to invite them. Somebody who doesn't go to church, you need to invite them to church. Next door to our house in Davenport lived a guy by the name of Mr. Hill. Irwin Hill was his name. Now, Mr. Hill came out sometime, and I'd be in his house, and we had a fence that was between the two of us. And I come out there, and this fence was falling down. One day I said to Irwin, Irwin, I'm going to fix this fence, make it happen. He said, well, you know what? He said, I'm going to help you fix that fence. I said, you are? He said, we'll work on it together. I said, well, Irwin, that'd be great. And so Irwin and I worked on that, you know. Every time I come out, you know what he'd do? He'd go, howdy, neighbor. And I thought, I like Irwin. He's a nice guy. Doesn't put any pressure on me. He just always says that, hi, Phil, how are you? Hey, neighbor, how are you? I don't know if he knew my name, but he didn't know I was his neighbor. So, hey, neighbor, how are you? And I thought, that's really great. You know, man, I need to say something to this guy. So Connie said to me, she goes, why don't you start by inviting Mr. Hill next door to church? Show him a little radical hospitality. I thought, oh, no. If I go over and I talk to him about coming to church, that'll ruin our relationship. It'll ruin our friendship. He'll never call me howdy, neighbor, anymore. He'll walk away from me. Connie said, you need to go talk to him. I gathered up that piece of paper, and I thought, who came up with this idea? That's the dumbest thing in the world. People got to sign this thing and bring it back to church. So I traipse over to Aaron's house, and I knock at the door, and Mrs. Hill was there. She opens up the door. She says, can I help you? And I said, yeah. I said, I want to come in and talk to you for a while. Is that okay? Why, yes. I walked in, and there was Irwin sitting in the couch, in the chair. And he goes, howdy, neighbor, how are you? And I said, Mr. Hill, I'm doing very, very well. He said, will you come in here? You sit down. I said, I will. We were sitting there, we were having a long conversation. Mrs. Hill, she went in the kitchen. She was hanging out in there for a while, and it was just Irwin and I were talking back and forth to each other. And I said, well, I talked about the weather. He gave me a tour of the house. We looked at anything and everything except what I had to do. And I thought to myself, the more we looked at his house, and I said, you know what, I can't do this to this boy. I just got to go home. So I said, well, Mr. Hill, I just want to tell you, I've enjoyed my visit today, and I'm going to leave, and I just want you to know I look forward to seeing you again. And Mr. Hill says to me, but didn't you come over here for something? Well, Mr. Hill, I did. Let me tell you what it is. We got this program down at the church somebody came up with, and I'm supposed to invite people to come 2 Sundays from today, and I'd sure like to have you come and visit our church. Could you do that, Mr. Hill? And Mr. Hill looked at me. He said, so you want me to come to the church down the hill? Yeah, the church where I'm a pastor. But I said, you know, I know you're a busy man, and I know you probably got a lot of things on your schedule, and I know that's the last thing you're able to do, and you're probably busy in 2 weeks, so don't let me push you at all. I don't want to. Well, wait a minute, he said. You know what? I think I'll come. Really? Yeah, he said. I think I'll come. We talked for a while more, and I just said to him, oh, Mr. Hill, that's great. I said, well, I'll look forward to you in a few weeks. Wait a minute. There's this paper they gave me I'm supposed to have and have you sign, and the whole thing. He said, well, here, give me that paper. I'll sign. I said, well, I don't have a pen. He goes, I'll get a pen. Don't worry about it. He signs it. And I didn't even bring a pen with me. I didn't have any faith in this process. He's signing his name. He tears it off, hands it to me. He said, there it is. You take that back. You put that on the wall at the church. I said, thank you, Mr. Hill. Whoa. I walked out of his house and I went next door to our house. And I walked in. I was in pure amazement at what had happened at that moment. I walked in the house and my wife said, how'd it go? Well, great, I said. First thing I said to him was, Mr. Hill, you want to come to church? He said, yeah. And I said, sign on the dotted line and you're here. Not a problem. Didn't take time at all. It was the easiest thing I've ever done in my life. She goes, really? I go, yep, not a problem. Bring them on. I'll take more. I even got his signed paper. He's going to show up and we'll put that on the wall. Well, she said, that's very good. You put that on the wall. If people see it, that'll encourage them to do it. If the pastor does it, they'll do it too. I said, yep. A few moments later, there was a knock at the door, and they came to the back door. So Connie hadn't come to the kitchen. They were sitting in the kitchen. I didn't catch much of it. I was in the other room, and all of a sudden, I looked in there, and there was Mrs. Hill sitting at the table with Connie. And she was crying. And I thought, oh no, I have done it bad. I probably have just ruined, I shouldn't have done what I did. And I walked in and Mrs. Hill was there. And she looked at me and she goes, you know what? She said, I'm mad at you. And I said, yeah. I'm so mad at you. I've been married to Erwin for 42 years. And he's never set foot in a church. And I've asked him. And then you come over and you ask him if he could come. And you know what? He said yes to you. 42 years I've wanted to go to church with that man. And he's refused. He's never set foot in that church. And you come over and you ask him. And he said yes. I'm mad at you. In 2 weeks, Erwin showed up. He didn't know any better. Like some of you, he sat on the front row of the church. Nobody told him that's not where he's supposed to sit. Supposed to always start at the back and work your way up. The next week, I was outside. Mr. Hill came to me. He goes, Pastor, he said, I want you to know I'm not going to be in church next week. And I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, that's because my father died. And he said, I've got to go to where he's at to do the funeral, so I'll be back. I said, well, that's very nice of you to tell me. He goes, I'm coming to church. He goes, I just wanted you to know where I was going to be. That I was going to be thinking about it and thinking about the church itself. The next week, Erwin shows up. He sat in that same pew. But I looked in that pew and I thought, what is the deal there? There's like 6, 7 other people in that pew with him. I said to Erwin, I said, do you know any of these people? Yeah, he said, that's my daughter and her husband. And that's my son and his wife and their kids. I invited them too. You did? Yeah, they've been going through a lot of hard times. They just need an invitation. Whew. Now, I'm telling you that story because I've been there. And I know that when you give God something as small as a mustard seed, when you just speak to somebody walking through your parking lot and all of a sudden a relationship starts, that's God's way of saying, you don't think I've prepared people for this block party? It has nothing to do with food and hamburgers. It has to do with holy food and holy invitations. If you want to get people to come to your church, you know what you do? You just simply build a relationship with them. And sometimes that relationship begins with, I look forward to seeing you on Sunday. And when they show up, say, don't you sit over there, you sit next to me. And as my wife Connie would do, give me that baby. I'll hold that baby. Do you have chocolate? We don't have chocolate. Don't worry about that. I'm child care. You are? I'm child care. Give me that baby. I'll hold on to it. That's radical hospitality. That's doing unto others as Jesus would do unto us. That's showing the love of Jesus through an invitation. I don't know if everybody in this town or community has been invited, but I do know that people know something's beginning to happen here. People are going to show at this thing because not of any invitation, it's because Christ has brought them there, because they need some food, but they also need more than that. They need emotional food, they need spiritual food. God says to them, now you need God in your life, and I want you to go to a place where they preach that, where they talk about it, where people really show love, like Iowa people do, what God people do, what Christian people do. And don't be surprised if you see a few tears. I tell you that story because I want you to know that's the expectation I've been praying for, and I hope you've been praying for it too. I have no idea what is going to happen, but I do know this. God knows it. God knows what's going to happen, and God's going to bring people here into our church and into our midst. I need you to open your hearts, not just talking to each other, but talking to perfect strangers. Jesus said, you were a stranger, you took them in. Jesus said, what you do to these, you do it unto me. Do a good job. Let Jesus shine through you in your light. And see what happens when all of a sudden we look around, we got a few extra people sitting in the pews. It won't come by my invitation alone. It'll come by the invite that you give. And if you don't know that person, it's okay. Ask. Jesus has already prepared the heart. That's my belief. We can see what can happen together. Jesus said, who'll go? And people said, here I am, Lord. Send me. Let's pray together. God, you told us where there's angst and animosity and all kinds of worry and fret, it's as of the Lord. Sometimes we know that the Satan himself comes against these things we have, creating all kinds of confusion and everything else because, man alive, we don't want that to succeed. That's powerful. And yet, God, when we give you something grain of a mustard seed, we can move mountains. So we're going to practice this Saturday what it means to be the church. And what that means is to be the church for each of us who make up this church. Give a warm smile, a loving way, to show hospitality at above and beyond. God, you prepare the hearts of people. We don't want to have to be confused and focused on what do they think of us. We just want to be faithful to you. We know, God, that if we give you that much, you'll show a blessing to this church and this congregation. There'll be no worry about a church ever closing. There'll only be a worry about how in the world we're going to get all those folks in. Because those people tell other people and on and on and on. That's what you say. Go out, find people, invite them, bring them in, teach them, train them up, teach them, send them back out again, and they'll bring more. Why? Because God help us, this world is hungry, it's starving, it's in darkness. And may the light of Christ in us shine bright. For this we ask in your holy name. And all the people said, amen.